Greetings, folks. It's me. It is Tuesday afternoon, March 17th, 2020. St. Patrick's Day. Happy St. Patrick's Day, everyone. St. Patrick's Day that is not being celebrated much as St. Patrick's Day in many quarters, including here in Maryland, because of the concerns over the coronavirus pandemic and the fact that many things are shut down, including bars and restaurants. Um, Gatherings of people. Originally, it was of 250 or more. Now I think it's down to 50 or more are forbidden by the state. Um, and the run on the stores apparently continues, although I think there's more going on than that, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. I am recently back from running an errand, which was successful, but it turned into a couple of other errands. I decided on my way back that I would stop at CVS and Martin's and Walgreens, all of which are in relatively close proximity to each other, and on the way back from my initial errand, just to see if I could find a couple of things that I'm not out of yet, but I'm a little concerned about the level of stock on if this situation continues for more than a couple of weeks, which is starting to look like it might. Unlike hurricanes and blizzards, it looks like things may be continuing unstable for a while. Not permanently, but for a while. And in all three of those locations, of course, it's not going to come as a surprise to anyone, but I saw a lot of empty shelves, and I do mean a lot of empty shelves, particularly Martin's, because the food is being purchased, presumably, and or it's not getting there, or some combination of the above. And of course, we still have the perennial now shortages of things like hand sanitizer and toilet paper and all these various things that we took for granted until suddenly there wasn't enough of them. They weren't around anymore, and now we're like, oh, now what do we do? And I'm as guilty as the next person on that. I tend to take a fairly optimistic outlook on things, and thought to myself, yeah, this is going to be rough for a little bit, but we'll get back up. We'll bounce back quick. We always do, and we will bounce back. I have no doubt about that, but whether it happens quickly or not is an entirely different story. So here's the thing. Some of this obviously is the result of people panic buying and hoarding. Particularly back before either the stores ran out, so there wasn't anything else to buy, or they began to put up signs saying no more than one per household or no more than two per household, and so on and so forth. But I am not convinced that that's the only thing that's going on here. The fact is, I have been to a number of retailers at a number of times of the day, ranging from early morning to early to mid-afternoon to, after work rush. And except for the initial panic buy on Friday when Governor Hogan closed the schools, I haven't seen all that many people there. So if shipments are coming in the way they're supposed to be, I'm a little bit of a loss to understand what's happening to the goods. Because there don't seem to be enough people there at any given time to be buying them out all that quickly. Now, I may be wrong about that. I may just have showed up at the times when there weren't people there, and at other times there were a lot more. But really and truly, I haven't seen more people at these stores than there would be on ordinary days since Friday and maybe Saturday. So while I don't have any, verifiable confirmation of this, the conclusion that I can't help reaching anecdotally is that shipments aren't coming in. Or at least they're not coming in as fast as they need to be to make up the deficit. In other words, that the problem at this point is not necessarily people buying stuff, although that may continue to be part of it. But at least a chunk of the problem seems to be on the supply and distribution end. And again, this is somewhat anecdotal. It's very anecdotal. But there was a woman at one of those local stores, I'm not going to say which one, who was bringing around signs and taping up signs on the shelves that said, maximum 2 per family, or per whatever the case happened to be, limiting the quantity of stuff that could be purchased. The thing is, she was putting them up on empty shelves, and as she did it, she saw me glancing over at her, and she says, "If anything ever comes back in." And I kind of chuckled sardonically and said, "Let me guess, everything's coming from China and they've cut us off." And she says, "Pretty much." And she says, "They're only shipping to their own country now." Now, again, I don't know, whether this was, her just kind of making assumptions in the same way that I was making assumptions, or whether there was, whether she had some corporate level confirmation of this. But you gotta wonder. China's been making some fairly unpleasant noises in our direction for some time. They've been expanding out into the South China Sea. They've been doing their Belt and Road Initiative, trying to bring, large chunks of the planet under their hegemony. Purchasing seaports and all of this stuff. And then here comes coronavirus out of Wuhan province. Out of Wuhan City. I can't remember the name of the province. It starts with an H, but whatever the case may be. Did it come from bats? Yeah, probably. Was it an escapee from a bioweapons lab? Who knows? I'm not saying it was. Chances are that it probably was just a natural, one of those flukes that happen periodically, like Ebola and like other, like HIV and like other miscellaneous diseases that have passed from animals to humans. Pretty much as long as there have been humans, and certainly as long as we stopped being hunter-gatherers and started gathering collectively in cities and agricultural communities, and were living in close proximity with animals rather than just going out and hunting them in the field periodically. Many to most of the diseases that have come to afflict human beings have originated outside of us, from the animal world. So, regardless of the source of this thing, it seems to me, and again, anecdotal, but it seems to me that China is doing a good job of living up to former Obama advisor Rahm Emanuel's dictum, never let a good crisis go to waste. Oh, look what's happened, and we can stick it to the Americans now. Am I wrong? Maybe. I hope. I'd love to be wrong. I would love it. Am I? I don't know. But here's what I do know, and this is the thing. There are undoubtedly a bunch of lessons that we can learn from this, but this is I think maybe the biggest one of all and the most influential. Once we get through this thing, and we will. But once we get through this thing, we really, really, really need to take a good hard look at how we are running our economy from the standpoint of globalism and reliance on global supply chains, on so-called just-in-time inventory, where corporations, businesses, etc., keep maybe 3 days stock on hand because they're expecting that the ships are going to keep coming and coming and coming, bringing in more and more so they don't have to stockpile much. And particularly, I think we're going to need to rethink, and I certainly think we ought to rethink, the notion of relying for our essentials. And I'm not just talking about toilet paper. I'm talking about things like personal protective equipment and medications and vaccines and medical supplies of various sorts. We are going to need to rethink the reliance that we have had up until this point for those essentials on countries that don't like us very much, on countries that are at best economic rivals and at worst geopolitical adversaries. The concept of nationalism, of putting our own country and our own people first, has been in bad odor pretty much since the end of World War II, when it was blamed for the expansionism of Germany and Japan and Italy in that war. But here's the thing, it wasn't their nationalism that was the problem in those cases. It was imperialism. It was expansionism. All nationalism means, or has to mean, is that we put the interests of our own country and our own people first. We make sure those interests are secure. And then we have the freedom to expand out and be nicey-nicey to everybody else. And we should be. But we've got to put our own interests, our own country, our own people at the forefront. And then after that, our reliable allies. And then after that, the people that, you generally get along with pretty well as long as everything is going right. And only then on the outside, the outermost circle, so to speak, are the ones that are likely to stab us in the back. We have spent the last several decades making nice to China because we thought that if we let them into the club and had good economic relations with them and so on and so forth, that they would somehow transmogrify themselves into liberal democratic free market culture and society and join the rest of the world. The Western world, not the rest of the world necessarily, but the Western world. In retrospect, it's starting to look a little naive, isn't it? And if it isn't, maybe it should. Because they were happy to take advantage of that relationship without changing to any significant degree. Now, you can argue about whether they're well and truly communist at this point. In some respects they are, in some respects they may not be. They're a very mercantile, capitalistic version of communist if they are. But the one thing that they are is statist and authoritarian and totalitarian. And there are a lot of corporations, Western corporations, American corporations, that have been perfectly willing to overlook that because it made them money. Not for nothing, as it said in the scriptures, that cupiditas, not money per se, but the desire for wealth, greed, in other words, is the root of all evil. I think that particular flock of chickens is starting to come home to roost. And economic nationalism and border security, which could have helped to slow the transmission of coronavirus, are things that are starting to look a lot better now than they may have done a few years or even a few months ago. There are going to be those that, oh no, we can't let this panic us, we can't let this, turn us into something that it's already doing that. And as the old saying goes, one of the definitions of insanity is trying the same thing again and expecting a different outcome. If we don't learn from this, from the mistakes that we've made that have led up to this, then we are fools. And this is not anything against the people of China. Don't misunderstand me. This is not anything against ethnic Chinese. This is not against the ordinary folks that happen to live in China, many of whom, as I have commented elsewhere, don't like their government too much either. But it's about taking a good, hard, open-eyed look at the world as it is, not as we might like it to be in our happy little fantasies about, everybody loves everybody else. I love you, you love me, kumbaya, etc. That'd be nice. But I'm not looking for it prior to the second coming. And, we've got this little thing called human nature that we've got to deal with. So as I say, we need to take a serious look at things. We need to start finding out how we are going to bring a lot of our manufacturing, and particularly our manufacturing of essential items, including but not limited to vaccines and other medicines, medical supplies and technology, personal protective equipment and things of that nature, but extending to other essential infrastructure as well. How we are going to be bringing that back onto our shores, into areas that we actually have some measure of control over, rather than simply relying on the fact that everybody else in the world is going to want to play nice. Because I think this has demonstrated pretty clearly that we can't count on that anymore, if we ever could. It's not about a siege mentality. It's not about, xenophobia. It's not about, any of that stuff that is used as scare words and buzzwords to try and talk us out of sensible behavior. It's about sensible behavior. And as I say, putting the interests of our own country and our own people first. If we don't, the future's not looking real great. So we're going to get through this. It may be tough. It may take longer than any of us would have liked, but we're going to get through this. But once we do, we need to do some cold, hard, clear-eyed thinking. And I pray that we do. That's all I got to say for the moment. Thanks. Happy St. Patrick's Day.